Whether you think you need it or not, end of life planning is something that we rarely think about. It's not something that you bring up at dinner saying, like, hey, let's talk about when you're dead. That's probably not going to happen. So, in today's video, I'm going to be talking about my experience with end of life planning and things I've been learning because I believe that every person should have an estate plan laid out, not only for yourself, but also, more importantly, your parents as well, especially if they come from an immigrant background and they rely on you. You need to watch this video. Hey, Kevin here. Welcome back. Before we start this video, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell button. Apparently with YouTube, the bell button is the most important thing, but you can't hit the bell button unless you're subscribed. So it would really mean a lot if you like the style of my content. If not, no worries as well. Also, I know this video is quite long, so I'll leave some timestamps where you can just fast forward in the video and get to the section you need if you're looking for something in a hurry. But really, essentially what you want to do is watch this whole video once and just make sure you take some notes as well, just so that you kind of understand what's going on as well. So over the last 2 years with my family, we've been thinking more and more about end of life planning. It first started off with my father when I visited him back in the end of 2017, where he was on his deathbed and we didn't have a end of life plan or any sort of thing. We didn't have power of attorney, we didn't have healthcare proxy, nothing was set up. And if you're anything like me, you come from an Asian background, we rarely ever talk about death for the most part because of bad luck, superstition, and it's not the most comfortable thing to be really talking about at dinner. You're not going to go up to your parents and be like, hey guys, we need to talk about what happens when you're dead. Usually what happens is a major life event happens, some sort of health crisis happens, and then you're scrambling to put all these documents together. And if you're unfortunate like us, if you're like anything like my family and didn't set these options up, you're A, setting up yourself for a lot of headache, B, setting yourself up for a lot of estate taxes. And the third thing is probably the worst. It's something called probate. When everything gets locked up, the deceased assets are determined by the state. And unfortunately, no one really teaches you this sort of stuff. I don't claim to be an expert. And more recently, I've been having to set up an estate plan with my mom. So I just kind of want to document my process, show you things that I'm learning from these different lawyers that I'm meeting up, and from cool videos like Frank or Ice1Cube on YouTube. He's the OG. Really gotta give him a lot of props because he inspired this video. But the truth is, unfortunately, no one really teaches you how to set up an estate. I mean, they don't teach it in school. You kind of have to figure it out. And the worst thing you can ever do is go into a lawyer's office blind. Let's face it, not all lawyers are good. Some of them will take advantage of you. And unfortunately, we had a lawyer take advantage of us. So I want to help you guys learn from my mistakes and everything that I went through. And so basically in today's video, I'm going to be talking about the three things. I'm going to be talking about the tools, including a trust, will, estate plan, durable power of attorney, healthcare proxy, and all that. The second thing, the roles to be filled. So things like personal representative. Third thing is to how to pick the right lawyer, which is really, really important. And so here was our process. After getting screwed by that initial lawyer, we decided to reach out to our friend's family who is a lawyer, and they actually set up their estate plan as well. And even though, you know, estate planning isn't really their specialty, basically we asked for essentially a referral for the person that they use, because chances are if a lawyer trusts that person, chances are they're like we'll have a better success rate with that person as well. And honestly, it's not my goal to make you a master at this. It's just to help you figure out what questions to ask when you're in the presence of a lawyer, or how to find a lawyer. If you have experienced this, I would love to kind of hear yourself. Also, if there's anything that I say wrong in this video, please kind of correct me down in the comments as well. And keep in mind, things do vary state by state, so you really need to talk to a lawyer about the specific things. But my goal again is to help you prompt these questions like, hey, what is the durable power of attorney, so that you can ask these key questions and they can explain to you. If you want my checklist for end of life planning, you can check out my website here, where I'm creating a actually overall checklist of end of life planning. If you have parents, if you want to set up your own estate, you have real estate, then you can go refugeehustle.com/end of life. Link will be in the description, so check that out. In this end of life checklist, I go over everything from funeral planning to collecting your assets to a lot of different things. I've been doing a lot of research from Reddit and cancer communities. A lot of time went into it, and I just want to share that with you guys as well, because I know how much of a headache this sort of stuff is. And if you're not organized, if you don't have everything, then it can be a total nightmare for y'all. So before we go over anything, we got to ask ourselves, why do we need these instruments like a will or trust or anything like that? So first things first, you got to ask yourself, what is the point of setting up your estate? What's the purpose of it? And like I mentioned earlier, there's two main reasons of why you want to do it. Actually, maybe three, but the first thing is probate. And basically, like I said, probate is the worst. Essentially, it's basically when there's no will, there's no documents of what the deceased wants, and basically the state actually distributes out the assets. And you know, this only applies to whatever is in the individual's name. So if you have joint accounts, they're actually excluded from this because they're considered something like a contract, right? Where, like, for example, your investment accounts are contracts as well. If they have beneficiaries, they're exempt from things like probate. That's something that you gotta consider, especially when my dad passed. A lot of the money was actually locked up in my dad's name as well. And the home that they bought was actually locked up as well. So we had to fight back for it. And it was a really extensive process. It was locked up for at least, I want to say 6 to 8 months, honestly. And when you're mourning, when you're going through death, that's not something you want to go through, guys. It really sucks. Now, the second thing that you want to consider are estate taxes. And basically, this is applied when someone dies. The freaking state and federal government just knock at your door and they're just like, hey, time to pay up, you died. And there's this funny expression that my friend's dad was saying, was that it ain't free to die anymore, which is really fucked up. I hate estate taxes, but that's something that is important to consider. I believe you get taxed for the federal limit over 11.5 million. In different states, like my home state of Massachusetts is about $1 million. You really gotta find out what is the limit in your state. But a good lawyer or a good accountant can actually figure out ways to do gifts or exemptions and stuff like that as well, and plan out the best way to not get dinged for estate taxes. There's also something cool called step up in basis at death as well, but you can ask your lawyer about that. It gets a little complicated and it's kind of outside the scope of this as well. The third thing that you want to consider are kind of like the lifetime documents as well. So keep in mind, things like a will are only at when you die. I mean, they don't really matter while you're alive, but in terms of healthcare matters, power of attorney, those are some things that you got to consider. That being said, that's why essentially you need to set up an estate. Now let's go into the key tools as well. And you'll hear something like a will. And the will is essentially making sure that your assets don't go to probate court. That's the whole purpose of the will. If no will, like I said, it goes to the state, aka probate court, which is a pain in the ass. You want to avoid that. It sucks up a lot of time. It is really, really slow as well. And so what my friend's dad was also saying was that a will can actually determine who your personal representative is or executor in the past, basically the person who's going to distribute your assets when you're gone. Something to consider as well, wills are considered very general. So for example, if you want to designate a certain amount to your grandchildren, you can't really do that. Something like a trust, you can have that surgical precision, but we'll get there. And also something to keep in mind is a will actually becomes public, meaning people can look things up, and it reduces your privacy if you're concerned about that as well. And basically when you sign a will, you can change that at any time as well, which leads me to the second thing. Let's talk about trusts. There's different types of trust, by the way. There's revocable trust, irrevocable trust. To be honest, I don't really know the difference. But basically, the purpose of something like a trust is almost essentially like a bucket, right? It's specific for certain situations, like if you want to give to your grandchildren directly. And this is where we get the term trust fund babies as well. It can, in some cases, be used to reduce tax liability as well. And also, more importantly, keeping your information private. One of the things that you probably don't want are people hounding you because all your information is public out there, especially for money. And also you can use it to designate kids and guardians for different families as well. For my family, we decided not to do a trust at this moment in time. Keep in mind, you can actually always set up a trust later, but for our needs, we didn't really have any grandchildren or anything like that. And so, and most of the assets are contract based. So retirement accounts, all that sort of stuff, we have beneficiaries set up. So it didn't really make sense to set up a trust in this case at the moment as well. The next thing we should actually cover are living documents as well. Things like a healthcare proxy. This can be either one or more individuals. Basically, from what our lawyer was telling us, most states all have this. And also, a lot of time it's considered, the criteria could be like family, someone who is close, but it's not as important these days. But most importantly, confidence and judgment, and someone that can provide context of what someone wants as well. Some things that my friend's dad was saying too was that, for example, this happens in a lot of stroke patients or coma patients. When they're incapacitated, that person or those people are going to be responsible for making those key decisions as well. It could be as a single person or both people. That's something important to decide. And second thing is something like a living will. So this has no formal binding significance. Now, I've heard this term also, advanced healthcare directive, which is apparently a type of living will. Basically, it helps makes decisions for the healthcare proxy where it would avoid unnecessary surgeries, and there's no formal binding significance, but it really helps if you have multiple proxies as well. It helps avoid conflict, it helps avoid ambiguity as well. So there's that. The next thing we have is something called the durable power of attorney. It's basically a document stating who the power of attorney is, which we'll cover in a bit, but basically they can do any sort of clerical work on your behalf. So they have a lot of power. You need to trust this person. You need to be able to trust this person. They have to be super responsible because they can basically sign off checks on yourself and rob you clean if they're not out of integrity, or if you don't feel like they're working in your best interest. Something important to consider. Now, speaking about power of attorneys and whatnot, let's go into the different roles that need to be assigned as well. And you might be all of them, you might be one of them. It's just whatever's available. And there's three things that you need to consider. First of all, you need to consider a personal representative. This basically happens when the person dies or passes. Basically, they're the ones responsible for distributing the assets to the estate when they're gone. Apparently, my lawyer was telling me this was also known as an executor at one point, but they passed, they don't use that term anymore. I don't know why, to be honest with you. And then the second thing is, as I mentioned, was the power of attorney. So basically, this person, they can make decisions on your behalf if they are unable or unwilling to make decisions. So basically, you can pay bills, you can make decisions, you can actually go to probate court on behalf of the person as well. And then also there's something called, last thing is the healthcare proxy. They carry out the advanced healthcare directive. They essentially make the important decisions based off of context, based off of conversation, based off of knowing that person as well. Like I said earlier, this is very common in coma or stroke type of patients where these situations can cost a lot of money, and pretty much the healthcare staff need a little bit of context of whether to pull the plug or not. In some cases, with my father, that was my mom, and it was very tough, but we had to make that decision to take my dad off life support. So you have to make those decisions as well. So those are some of the roles that you need to assign as well. But the third thing, the most important thing I think out of this whole, if there's one thing that you need to watch, is really this. It's really finding the right lawyer, because we've been burned with bad lawyers in the past who try to rob us for every single dollar, did not want to help us and all that. But it's really finding the right lawyer. And basically what you're looking for is an estate lawyer, and it can vary from state to state, but there's three things to really essentially look for. First thing, you're looking for a trusted advisor. You're looking for someone who's level-headed, who will work in your best interest. Remember I was telling you about that lawyer that burned us before? We thought he was working in our best interest, but he was complicating our situation just so that he could bill us for more hours as well. And being so new and having my father, who passed away. It was literally my fault essentially for not being more prepared going in, but also he took advantage of us while we were in a very emotional state with my father. Like, I really did not want to think too much, but that's how you get burned in those vulnerable situations. So first thing, you need a trusted advisor. Second thing, you need someone who's thorough. And so basically they plan for things that you wouldn't think about based off their experience. When I think about someone who's thorough, I think about my friend Tom, who basically, you know, whenever I work with him, I always ask him, hey, did you consider this? He was like, Kevin, I've already thought about it. We've already built out the system. And it's like, great. It just makes you feel so freaking good. But again, with the lawyer that burned us, there was none of that. There was none of that whatsoever. And he actually screwed up our deed and stuff like that at one point as well. So there was that. And then third is the X factor. My lawyer friend said that this was the most important thing. You just gotta hit it off. You gotta feel comfortable. And this is the most important thing, especially for my mom getting burned by that lawyer in the past, because that was actually a referral from my uncle who no longer used that lawyer as well. But basically, the most important thing is for the person to feel comfortable, to feel like they're well taken care of. This new lawyer that we had, when we sat down and spoke to him, it was one of the best experiences ever. You could tell that he truly cared. He always took the time to answer my mom's questions, and he was super thorough. He made sure that we understood everything. He was a trusted advisor. He didn't push anything on us. He asked us, hey, so what are some of the documents you need? We went over all these. What are the documents that you think we need? And so that's why, for myself, after getting burned the first time with our lawyer, when we were looking for a new lawyer, I took more responsibility this time. I basically reached out to our family friends. We had a discussion about how they set up their estates and whatnot. And then basically we talked about how they set up their estate, and then kind of understood the high level process, and then asked like who they recommended for a particular lawyer. And I had a few people who recommended their people as well. So that was kind of the whole thing that happened with us, and we couldn't be happier. And the reason why this part is the most important, because you need to ask them. There will be a point in the conversation where they're going to be asking you, so what do you exactly need? So one of the things that you never want to do, you just never want to go in blind. So you might be asking yourself at this point, okay, Kevin, I hear I need a will, a trust, all this sort of stuff. I know about these sort of things, but what do I need? And this is why the lawyer is the most important part, because you need to ask them. For most people, they'll have a straightforward estate like real estate, maybe some retirement accounts, but they can get complicated. I mean, for example, if you have out of country assets, right? If you have businesses, you have multiple marriages, things like that, you need to ask them, in their opinion, in their experience, based off their experience, what do they feel like is appropriate as well? And they should be able to walk you through the thought process. Our lawyer was really great. We talked about each of the instruments. We decided that we didn't really necessarily need a will at this point in time. So that was my experience. So that's pretty much it. That is how we planned out our end of life documents as well. If you guys are interested in some of the other things that you need to plan in terms of end of life, there's a lot more that goes into it. I'd be more than happy to share whatever I know, because I'm literally going through this right now, and want to make sure that I can help you guys as I'm going through this as well. So those are my thoughts. Let me know. Was there anything that you had questions about? And I love to kind of hear from you. Do you have any questions about any sort of these things? I have a few lawyer friends. Maybe I can get them on this channel. Maybe we can make a good conversation out of this as well. That is pretty much it. Start planning for your parents or for your estate, especially if you have real estate. And I'll talk to you guys later. Take care. Bye.